may be the most rewarding job on the planet, but it is also very hard and thankless work. So don't worry, we're in this together. Ascension EAP and all my teammates are here and happy to help if you're coming into some parenting struggles and you just don't know how to handle it. But hopefully today, this presentation will give you a few more tools in your toolbox, especially with regard to helping your child to regulate those intense negative emotions like anger, if your child has temper tantrums or gets really mad about little things, or if your child has anxiety and they worry and they fret and they avoid situations. I'm going to try to adapt the interventions that I'm talking about today and give you some ideas of how you might use them with young children all the way up into teenagers. And let's be honest, this stuff even works for adults as well. So it's good for parents, as parents, that we practice and role model these emotion regulation strategies for our children, because our children, let's face it, they're not going to get a good handle on this if the parents themselves aren't doing it. So we're going to talk about the stress response, that fight or flight system. And if you've seen other presentations that I've done, it's something that I talk about a lot because it's such a foundational aspect of emotional regulation. And it's important to understand how that works. We're going to discover emotion identification and regulation strategies. So when I'm feeling sad, how do I know that I'm feeling sad? When I'm excited, how do I know I'm feeling excited? So being able to identify emotions as they arise. And then once I understand that emotion, how can I regulate it? So teaching you some skills and strategies to help your child with those things. Discuss how to help your child shape their thoughts. We know that thinking leads to feeling, which leads to behavior. So if your child is overly negative or catastrophizing or imagining the worst about situations, that's going to have an outcome in the way that they feel and behave. So helping you to know how you can help your child to be more positive, to be more optimistic or realistic. And then defining basic needs and how these are crucial for your child's healthy functioning and behavior. So a lot of times parents bring their child into counseling and they say, we need to work on this emotion regulation stuff. But the truth is they're not safe at home or they're not getting adequate nutrition. And those basics of functioning need to be in place before we can start working on behavior. So we're going to start with the fight or flight system, that stress response. And again, just starting with the basics, right? So if you've done any study in human services, you've probably seen a model similar to this. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? And Abraham Maslow said that we need to start at the bottom of this pyramid and get those physiological needs met before we can move up the ladder. So the physiological needs are water, clothes, and shelter, but also healthy food. If our kids' bodies aren't getting the vitamins and nutrients that they need, they're not going to function properly. And let's face it, our diet isn't always the healthiest. I'm guilty of that, and I'm sure many of you are too, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, but just something to be aware of so that we can make those small improvements over time. Sleep is so important, and I know that children have trouble with sleep for a variety of reasons, but one that I hear of a lot is they have unlimited access to screens, phones, tablets, computers, TVs in their room, and that's not good for a developing brain. So I know it's hard to pick the battle and to set limits and be consistent, but it really, really is important that your child gets good sleep for healthy functioning. Of course, exercise is a big deal. Not only does it get their body moving, it also increases motivation. It keeps their muscles strong, keeps their heart healthy, and it helps with mental health. Some doctors have said that exercise is the natural antidepressant. So I know if your kid is sluggish and maybe having a hard time doing their schoolwork, force them to get outside, ride their bike, take a walk around the block, and you'll find that as you do that more and more, your child's going to have more and more energy and motivation. And then also taking a look at toxicity. We live in a very toxic environment, unfortunately. We've heard about BPA and plastic and the danger of microwaves and pesticides and fertilizers and all those things. So as parents, we do our best to keep our children away from those things. Once we move up from physiological needs, talking about safety needs, the child needs to be in an environment that's free from violence, domestic violence, bullying, neighborhood violence, community violence, violence on TV, violence in movies. Even though those things aren't real per se, or it doesn't pose an imminent risk to the child if they see it on the news, those things really can affect the child's sense of safety. And so it's important that at every age, we're keeping exposure to that at a minimum. There's just no need to stir up that fight or flight system and cause it to be imbalanced over things like watching scary movies. Stable housing is another one. And I know that divorce is a very common thing and children have to go back and forth between two houses, but it's really important that the parents can work together to keep that as stable and consistent as possible for the child's well-being. I mean, when that's not in place, again, if I don't know if I'm going to be at mom's or dad's, I don't know what rule I have to follow. I don't know what boyfriend or girlfriend is coming over. I don't know what step siblings are going to be there, right? It causes a lot of confusion and anxiety. And it's really hard to work on emotion regulation and behavior management when the child's environment is not stable. So once those needs are met, then we can work up to love and belonging. And it's important that children have a strong bond with their caregivers. So that could be parents, guardians, grandparents, families, friends. It's nice when the caregivers are that strong, positive influence in the child's life, but we know sometimes that's just not possible. So can we pull in other members of the family or friends to stand in that place? Healthy friendships and social connections are essential for normal, healthy development. And then this is the boundaries and expectations part where, yes, all your physiological needs are met. Yes, all your safety needs are met. Yes, your caregivers love you and they want to take care of you. And no, it's not okay for you to have screaming fits and slam the door and kick the cat, right? So part of being in relationship with people is understanding how to regulate emotions and how to be appropriate and healthy in those relationships, not dominating with anger, not withdrawing and, passivity or hurt or, but being able to bring those things out in a healthy way and resolve them through relationships. So that's really the level that we're going to be talking about today. And then when a child can regulate their emotions, when they have positive influence from friends and caregivers and all those other needs are met, then they tend to have that high self-esteem or that realistic self-esteem that we're talking about. Not that they feel that they're perfect and entitled and whatever, but they have this general sense towards the world that I can do it. I will do it. I know how to do it. I want to do it, that motivation. So again, it's hard to work on self-esteem when some of these underlying issues are major problems for the child. But once that child has that strong sense of self-esteem, I can, I will, I want to, then they're going to live that self-actualization, which is really just a fancy term for living their best life. So it's important that we're taking a look at this hierarchy and seeing where some needs might not be met, and we have to start kind of towards the bottom and fill those in and work our way up. But it's not really within the scope of this presentation today to talk about a lot of those safety and physiological needs, but I do want to point out, or just, I guess, ask what triggers your child. So some of the more extreme adverse events might be domestic violence in your home or in another home that your child is staying. Sibling violence is often an overlooked problem, but it can be very severe and it should not be ignored. Bullying, whether in school or social media or in the community, or just triggers or trauma reminders. Maybe your child has had a bite from a dog and every time they see a dog, they get really upset, or a major medical illness or injury, or separation from a parent, or a car accident, things like that, that would just really cause them to be stirred up and triggered. On the other hand, if sometimes none of those things are applicable to your child's life, and if that's you and your children, you are doing great, because I have to say, even my children haven't come out completely unscathed from some of that trauma stuff. It's really normal. We know from the ACEs study that the majority of children have at least one ACE or adverse childhood experience, and many children have more than one. So it is common, and children can recover. But those needs need to be attended to first. And then if your child is reacting to things like it's time to do your chore, or no, you can't do that, or shut off the video games, or it's time for bed, and they're like, wow, losing their minds over stuff like that, that's really when we can start practicing that emotion regulation and things that we're going to be talking about today. So, and they're good skills. They're good skills for, like I said, through the lifespan, whether your child is 2 years old or 52 years old, these things that I'm going to teach you today, they really do work. So let's talk about the fight or flight system. It's a biochemical process that happens instinctually. It's not like you control your fight or flight system, and it kicks on anytime your brain perceives that there's danger. So it could be actual danger, like you're walking through the woods and all of a sudden a bear appears and your fight or flight goes, oh goodness, we need to survive this. or it could be perceived danger. Your child sees something on the news, or they watch a scary movie, or it's time to go to bed, right? Any kind of stress can trigger this fight or flight system. And what happens is adrenaline and cortisol are released into the bloodstream, which changes physiological functioning from head to toe. Your pupils will dilate, and the brain tries to take in sensory information so they can see where that threat is. So if mom is the one who's saying it's time to shut off the video games and go to bed, pupils dilate and they're looking like, no, I'm not going to bed, right? And so they're really keyed in on movement, on visuals, on sound. That the brain is taking in more of that sensory information rather than critical thinking. Immunity and digestion shuts down. Breath becomes quick and shallow. Muscles tense, and often shoulders pull in to protect the core. Your heart pounds, and there's that, thumping in your chest. And again, the brain, the cortex of the brain, the outer bark part, the squishy part around the outside of your brain, it's called the cortex. That is the part of our brain that is the higher functioning part. Critical thinking, emotion regulation, problem solving, that whole part of the brain basically shuts down, and you're really operating in the underlying limbic system. So here's the cortex, here's the limbic system, or the lizard brain, your autonomic functions, sleep regulation, breathing, heartbeat, things like that. And so your brain is really operating on those autonomic function part of your brain. So your critical thinking just completely shuts down. You can't reason with an unreasonable person. And when a fight or flight is activated in a strong way, there's just no talking about it at that point. And it's a very reactive versus responsive. They're not thinking about, okay, there's the bear, what should I do first, right? They're just like, oh my gosh, there's the bear, I need to do something about this. And so it seems kind of out of control. And for kids who haven't learned skills to regulate emotions, it absolutely does seem out of control. And for parents who are dealing with kids who experience this, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So that stress response, when have you, just do a quick self-reflection, when have you felt your fight or flight system at work? And it could be those, like I said, really dangerous situations, like you're driving down the road at 70 miles an hour and a deer pops out of the bushes and you slam on your brakes and then you feel kind of jittery, like, oh my gosh, that was a close one, right? That's a great example of fight or flight system in action. But it could even be little things like your boss says, we need to talk. Or your kid, maybe you know that it's time for your child to shut off the video games and you know that there's going to be a power struggle, and just the thought of that activates your fight or flight system and puts you in that tense state before you even say anything to your child. Or maybe looking at this picture of the spider is doing a little fight or flight reaction for you. So it's important to realize that our fight or flight gets kicked off a lot throughout the day, and that's true for our children. It's just that often children react to different things than adults do. They don't care what your boss has to say, but they do care when they have to do a chore. So some people are naturally more of the fight, and some people are naturally more of the flight. And there are some people who do freeze as well. I mean, the shorthand is fight or flight, but we could add fight, flight, freeze, or even faint on there if we wanted to. So think about your child. When they get stressed out or hear the word no, or they're triggered by whatever, do they become non-compliant, combative, and struggling for personal power? They tend to be more dominant, and I'm going to win this scenario, and you're not the boss of me kind of kids. On the other hand, some kids are very much more inclined to do the flight. They're resistant. I'm not doing that. You can't make me. They cross their arms. They turn their shoulder. They disengage, withdraw, go to their room, refuse to talk about it. And some kids are freeze. They are just fine. Whatever you want, I'll do it, right? They might be crying silently, but they're not making a big fuss about it. So think about your children. How do they typically respond to conflict? These problems may very well be survival mechanisms in action. Now, fight, from a parenting standpoint, tends to be the hardest to deal with in terms of the power struggle, the tantruming. And I'm talking, whether your child is 2 or 17. It looks different, but it's kind of the same mechanism. And it's hard. That's a hard one for parents. And I have 3 fight kids. Oh, nobody in my family backs down. The flight, though, may be a little bit easier to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Those kids, though, might have a harder time with motivation or, things like that. But the flight, you have to be careful, because when kids are shutting down, all of that emotion turns inward. And those are the kids who are at a higher risk for things like self-harm, right? They're feeling things so strongly, but they have no outlet to let it go. So sometimes we see that in cutting behavior or self-sabotage kind of behavior. So hopefully you're able to see like how your kid tends to react in stressful situations. And then once you know that, you are more better prepared, I guess, to figure out the strategy that's going to work. Now, what we want to do when fight or flight is activated is we want to shut that down and activate the rest digest system, which is the opposite system from fight or flight. And like we talked about, when kid is in fight or flight, there's no reasoning with them. You're not going to try to explain why their behavior's wrong, right? They're just going to scream in your face or whatever. And consequences may help, but usually make the situation worse. So when their child is being petulant and you say, "That's it, you're not going to your friend's house tomorrow," I just know from my own experience that tends to escalate the situation. And now I've lost my leverage because now that they're not going tomorrow, why do they care about anything? And things get worse. So that's often true. Some kids respond well to those kinds of threats, but overall, discipline is very appropriate, but can be held off until everybody's calm and we can talk rationally about it later. So how do you de-escalate that fight or flight system? There's just basic biology. What do you need to do? Take a break, walk away from the situation, remove yourself from the stressor, because while you're in that situation, things just keep escalating. You need to create some distance, relax the body, counteract that fight or flight system and all the sensations it's created, right? Relax the body, soothe the senses. And in my family, we call it getting a grip, right? When one of my kids is really upset, losing their mind, I'll say, "Why don't you step outside for a little while and get a grip?" But maybe in your family, you have a different way of talking about it. All right, so next we're going to talk about identifying emotions. And here is a chart that works well with the zones of regulation. Excuse me. So many children use the zones of regulation in school, and it's basically just 4 different colors that represent 4 zones or kinds of emotions. And what I like about this particular chart, though, is it helps by asking 2 questions for you and the child to identify which zone that they're in. So if you see at the top there under how do I feel, it says high energy. So that's I'm really mad, I need to explode, I'm losing my mind, I'm going to punch something, I'm going to yell something. Or anxious energy, like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, what am I going to do, right? But it's high energy, we call it agitation. Or you can have high energy positive feelings, which is excitement or exuberance, like, this is awesome, I'm going to Disney World and it's going to be amazing, right? So that exuberant energy. If you have low energy, though, you might be lethargic and sad and disappointed and hopeless, and I don't feel like doing school and you can't make me, which is the blue zone. Or you can have low energy positive emotions, which would be calm, accepting, content, relaxed, or the zones of regulation would say ready to learn. And that's the zone that we want to be in most of the time. So you can see high energy, low energy, negative feelings, positive feelings. And just based on that alone, it's a little bit easier to identify what kind of feelings I'm having or what zone I'm in. So helping the child name the feelings. So you can use a chart like the one I've given you, or there's many feelings charts out there depending on the age of your child. Some of them are just faces with like happy, sad, mad, glad, basic emotions, to more complex ones, wheels with many different emotions on there for older children or teenagers. But wherever age your child is at, it's a good idea to start now, if you haven't already, to name those feelings. Help the child put words to their emotions. Get in the habit of identifying emotions with your child throughout the day, positive and negative. So for example, I might say to my child, I'm frustrated when I'm trying to tape a recording and you keep making a big fuss outside my door. Or I am excited that dad made such a delicious dinner tonight and I can't wait to eat it. Or I'm a little bit anxious about going to the dentist today. I'm worried about what he's going to say. Anything, any kind of activity that you're doing throughout the day, just practice putting words to that and identifying what that emotion is and modeling that for your child, whether they're small. When my kids were little, my mom taught them the happy, sad game. She would go, happy face, sad face, right? So even infants can play that game. And research has shown that when people have a greater feelings vocabulary, they're more aware of how they feel. For people who have a very flat vocabulary, for example, I had one client who was just angry about everything, angry at mom, angry at dad, angry at sister, angry at work. I'm like, you use that word a lot, but there's got to be more to it. And when we broke it down, there was a lot more to it. Frustrated, vulnerable, fearful, right? So try to use multiple different words to describe feelings throughout the day and expand that vocabulary. And teach your children to do the same as well. So here's some examples. I can see how frustrated you are by the way you're yelling and crying. Or it looks like you're angry by the way you're crossing your arms and pouting your lip. You might even mirror their behavior just to help them to be aware of their body language. When you get quiet, it makes me think that you might be feeling sad or overwhelmed. Am I right? So you want to link that body language and behavior with the emotion. And this teaches your child to observe behavior for clues about emotion. So for example, when you mirror that to them, they might go, oh, I didn't realize I was pouting my lip. Or how do I know that I feel sad? Well, my face is kind of frowny and my shoulders are slunk, right? So helping them to put those clues together to figure out when I'm sad, this is what I look like, this is what I feel like, this is what I sound like. When I'm excited, right? And that seems like common sense. And for some people it is. For some people, your personality just naturally picks up on this stuff and you don't even think about it, you just do it. But not everybody, that's not true for everybody. And I spend a lot of time in counseling helping even adults recognize what emotions are, what they look like, what they feel like, what they sound like. I had one gentleman who, when I asked him if he was sad, he's like, how would I know if I'm sad? Like he literally didn't know. So next we're going to talk about regulating emotions. And what this really is de-escalating that fight or flight system or activating that rest and digest system. So you might hear it talked about in different ways, but that's basically what we're doing, regulating emotions by de-escalating fight or flight and activating rest digest. So the most simple and effective technique is just simply to breathe. And any child over the age of probably a year, maybe even less than that, I don't know, but they can use this technique. So the fight or flight system causes our breath to be quick and shallow. So you want to intentionally just breathe in for several counts, hold, breathe out, repeat. There's no right or wrong way to do this, except you want to teach your child that when they breathe in and take air into their body, they don't want to breathe into their shoulders, which is kind of the natural thing to do. Instead, breathe into the belly, like you have a balloon down there that you're trying to fill up. When you fill up that balloon, it creates tension in your abdomen, which puts pressure on that vagus nerve, which tells the brain to activate rest and digest. So it's important that you belly breathe into that balloon rather than shoulder breathe. That's the only rule about breathing. Some kids like to do, in fact, my 4Ker, when she was in 4K, came home and told me to smell the flower, blow out the candle, right? That's a great one for little people. Older ones might like square breathing, breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4, or triangle breathing, or snake breathing, or blowfish breathing. I don't know. There's a million breathing strategies out there. It doesn't really matter. Just find one that is appropriate for the age of your child and one that they can remember and use. And then in addition to that breathing, let the stress out, relaxing the body. When we're stressed, our muscles tense, our shoulders rise up, we protect our core. That's why people get headaches and jaw pain, right? Because of stress and tension. So teach your child to drop their shoulders down, open your chest wide, make yourself nice and big and relax. And you might say something like, time to let the stress out, to cue this response. Pairing this with belly breathing, like opening the chest and breathing wide, is a great way to relax the body and de-escalate the fight or flight. Or young children, or even older, might like to do the shake the stress out. And that's just simply shaking all the stress out, right? And little kids like to do silly things, and they love it even more when caregivers will do silly things with them. So you can role model this, like, I'm just so mad right now. I'm going to shake my stress out. And if some kids like to be touched, you might even go up to them and grab, in a safe way, but grab their arm or something and say, I'm going to help you shake the stress out. And so I'll do that to my 9-year-old. This really helps to turn things around for her because she's very much a touch child. So I'll say, okay, you're really stressed out. You're really tense. We need to let the stress out. So just relax. And I'll shake her arms and I'll shake her shoulders and her legs, right? And pretty soon she's smiling and we're just all in a better place. So that can be a fun strategy if your child can enjoys touch and that works for them. It doesn't work for every child. Do you need a hug? Studies show that touch signals safety and trust. It soothes, it calms that cardiovascular stress, which is just another way of saying that fight or flight system, right? Your heart's pounding. Human touch elicits compassion and activates that parasympathetic nervous system. That's just a fancy way of saying the rest and digest system that we've talked about. Hugging activates that. And a simple touch can trigger your oxytocin hormones or your love hormones. So again, this isn't going to work for every child, but it works for 2 out of the 3 and sometimes the third. When things are just in complete chaos, everybody's melting down, I'll say, honey, do you need a hug? And just, right? It causes instant de-escalation. So hugging, touching can be very calming and helpful to de-escalate the fight or flight. However, there are some rules about touching. You need to be in a calm state in order to elicit a calming touch. If you're just really mad at your kid and you're like, get over here, give me a hug, right? That's going to make things worse. Or, critical thinking is shut down if you're upset, if they're upset. So even if you have good intentions to come and give a calming touch, your child might perceive that as threatening or aggressive. So just be really, really careful that you're not in an agitated state when you're trying to elicit a calming touch, because that will just make the agitation escalate for both of you. And I also want to say, I'm not taking a stand for or against corporal punishment. I'm usually the gray area person, and it's true in this case as well. But one thing I will say, that corporal punishment should never be administered when you're in an agitated state, because it's just too easy for it to get out of hand. So make sure that you're in a calm, relaxed state. And if you're going to administer corporal punishment, that it's done in a very disciplined and regulated way that's going to help your family meet their goals rather than hinder it. If there's a history of violence in the family, or of course child abuse, or if you have a very sensitive child, sometimes spanking can be counterproductive. So and sometimes you might have a child where spanking is a very effective strategy, and another child where it makes things a whole lot worse. So again, every child is different, and you just have to be tuned in enough to figure out what works for each child, what strategies you can use with who. And I know that's a tough job. So if you get stuck, call EAP. That's what we're here for. Another strategy is to create a calm space. This may be a space in your house, maybe a bedroom or a basement area or a rec room, a craft room, a closet, or it might be in a space outside, a garden, a deck, a park, a tree house. It might be an atmosphere you create with music and lighting. So even like sitting out in the quietness of the car. I know many parents have done that during this virtual time, using music to regulate the atmosphere, maybe a special lamp or a candle. You might have plants, soft blankets, anything that helps relax your child, pretty pictures on the wall, natural sunlight, and your whole family will benefit from the calm space. So I'll just give you my own example. My house is pretty chaotic and crazy a lot of the time. And when things are messy and disorganized, it causes stress for me. But I've also realized I've had to let some of that go. But it's just, right? It's stressful. So my office that I work in is my calm space. I have pictures that I like to look at on the walls. I have, soft lighting in here. I have lots of house plants. It's just a calm space. And so at the end of my day, when I'm done with work and I'm tired, sometimes I'll just sit in here and just shut everything off and relax and breathe and just get a minute, get a grip, right? Sometimes my kids want to come in here by me, and I'm okay with that. But I tell them, okay, but this is my calm space right now. So you need to leave your stress at the door. Otherwise you can't come in. And some of my kids are good at like, okay, I'm in the calm space. I'm going to be calm. One of my kids, though, has a really hard time letting her stress go out the door. And she's trying to tattle and she's trying to pick fights and she's trying to whatever. And I'll like literally remove her and say, this is my space. Now I can still hear her yelling outside the door, but it's almost like a force field of peace around me, right? So use a safe or calm space in your house, and also think about it in terms of time. You know, I wish I could spend my whole life in my calm space where it's peaceful and quiet, but the reality is if I can just spend 5 minutes when things are crazy out there and dinner and dog and kids and neighbors and who knows what's going on, to just come in there for 5 minutes and take a break and then go back out. Or 10 minutes, or if we can build up to taking that calm space with me. So I've been in my calm space for 10 minutes, and now I'm going to go out and be the calm space amid the chaos, right? So thinking about it in different ways and how you can create that in your home environment, in your time, in your family. Calm down kits can be very effective. So it's just maybe a shoebox or something that you put things in there that when your child is upset, that they can go to this calm down kit and take a look in there and find some things that are going to be helpful to help them de-escalate. So soothing things like bubbles and pinwheels, right? It's really deep breath when they're blowing bubbles or blowing on pinwheels. Pictures of friends, family, or pets, a stuffed animal that's fun to squeeze. Lotion not only has the soothing scent, but also this physical sensation. Soft blankets. Some kids like to wrap themselves up really tight. That's really comforting and calming. Or just the softness on their face or hands. Brushes for combing hair or skin can be very soothing. A weighted vest or blanket. That was just a really, really good investment for one of my children. Just very highly intense child, really hard for her to calm down. And we bought her a weighted vest, and it was pricey, but well worth the investment. I will tell you that does help her, not all my children. Chewing gum can be a very soothing, repetitive motion that helps to de-escalate. Music, again, music needs to be used strategically. If your child needs to calm down, it may not be best for them to listen to gangster rap or heavy metal. However, if you have a highly intense child, maybe that is the level of music that they need to listen to for a while before they can de-escalate. So again, different kids need different things, but trying to be strategic about what kind of music you're listening to and how it impacts and regulates emotions. You know, if you're excited that you're going to a birthday party, you might put on the happy song, or if you need to calm down and relax and go to bed, you might listen to some classical soothing sounds or, whatever, but be strategic about music. Instructions for breathing or relaxing muscles. Sometimes when that critical thinking part of the brain shuts down, it's hard to remember, especially for kids. It's hard to remember the skills that they've learned and talked about. So having handouts in that box to remind them to breathe and to relax their muscles, and essential oils for smell. Distracting is really about trying to get their head space off of that stressful thing. When mom said it's time to do chores and they lost their mind and they just can't think about chores for a minute. So they get out the calm down kit and they're doing some fidgets, maybe Rubik's cubes, dot to dot, coloring pages. Maybe they like to make model cars or Legos or whatever, right? It just to distract them from the stressful thing so they can calm down. Now, it's important, though, that they don't just get to not do chores tonight because it makes them too upset. They need to be in a calm enough space so that parent or guardian or caregiver can come back and say, okay, I told you it was time to do chores. You got really upset. I gave you time to cool off, but it's still your responsibility to do chores. Thank you for using your emotion regulation strategies. That was really great. And then, unfortunately, if they did something that was harmful to themselves or someone else, you might want to dole a consequence. It's not okay to hit your brother even when you're mad. So now not only do you have to load the dishwasher, but you have to wipe off the counters too. Something like that, whatever, however you want to have the conversation. But again, it's important that just because they get upset, that the conversation isn't over. They need time to calm down, but then we're going to talk about it again. And then processing the incident. It's awesome and amazing when kids are natural writers and they'll go to their room and just start journaling about it. That is like so healing. So put a journal and pen in there, or paper and pencil for kids who don't have the words or maybe the skills to write yet, or just for those kids who are naturally more artistic and have an easier time expressing themselves through art rather than words. So art supplies, talking to God through prayer or even saying mantras. So, for example, I use my faith in parenting all the time. And so teaching my children Bible verses is really helpful to our family. So things like, if they're feeling anxious, there's a Bible verse that says, God did not give me a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of sound mind. So teaching them those things that will enrich their lives, that can kind of coach them through the hard times, whether it's Bible verses or it's just quotes that you've heard on the internet that you like, or maybe your own religious literature or advice that you've gotten from others, right? So just kind of help your child to learn those and to make them part of who they are. And then calling a grandparent or a supportive person is a really great strategy too. I know when my kids get upset, I want to call grandma. Awesome. Grandma can handle you right now, right? So if they have other people that they can reach out to, it can be really helpful to process that incident and help them calm down. All right, so like I've been saying all along, not everything works for every kid, and some of those highly intense or fight kids have a hard time de-escalating, more so than, some of the more, I don't know, less passionate, less emotional, less sensitive kids who maybe don't feel things as strongly and calm down quicker. But for those intense kids, you might want to mirror them in a toned down way. So Dr. Harvey Karp wrote The Happiest Baby on the Block, and he also talks about how toddlers are like cavemen, right? We talk about the limbic system, which is just autonomic functions, and then the cortex, which goes over the top, which is not mature and not experienced. And so they really are like little cavemen running around, operating on more of that limbic system than the higher parts of their brain. And so when they're upset, like having a temper tantrum because they can't have the piece of candy in the supermarket, you can't try to reason with them like we've talked about, but they need to know that you understand. So Dr. Harvey Karp said to kind of have a tantrum with them in a toned down way, like, you're so mad you can't have the candy. I would be mad too. That's not fair, right? To try to use short words, gestures, emotion, tone, all those things. And when your kid sees like, wow, mom's mad about this too, it just helps to like meet them where they're at so that they can de-escalate. Now, he talks about this in terms of toddlers, but I think for some kids, this is a good strategy that can go throughout the lifespan. Even my husband, sometimes when he gets really mad, I'll be like, I know you're mad, right? And sometimes just mirroring it back to him that way, like catches his attention and he's like, oh, you get it. So it's a strategy, and it looks a little bit silly, right? When you're like, oh, you can't go to the swimming pool and that sucks, right? And your friends are watching like, what are you doing? You're like, sorry, I'm just talking to my kid, right? But it can be helpful if you're willing to engage in that. And intense kids may need intense stimuli to calm down. So for some kids, when they're upset, they need calming music. For other kids, calming music isn't even going to come to their radar because they're just so agitated and upset. So they might need some blaring music, some heavy metal, some whatever, like to just get it all out. And once they've exhausted that agitation, then they can move into a different zone. For some kids, the intense tactile stimuli. So a freezing shower. I had one kid who told me they were so upset. It was the middle of winter. It was below zero. They went outside and stood in a t-shirt for as long as they could stand it. And they came back in and it just really helped. For me, that would make things worse. Being cold really agitates me. But for some kids, that's what they need. Holding an ice cube until it burns, flipping a rubber band on their wrist. And it's not like we necessarily want them to do these things. Hopefully over time, as they get better and better at regulating emotions and we're not escalating to a 10 so easily, and we're being able to de-escalate a little bit faster, hopefully at some point they're not going to need this intense stimuli. But to start, sometimes this is really what you just need to use. And I have this guy playing the drums because that was my experience growing up. My brother had a drum kit, and so anytime he was mad, the whole family got to listen to him play his drums. So it's kind of hard sometimes, but it works. So going back to this chart, all right, remember that we talked about agitated being that high energy negative feeling. Now, agitation is the most dangerous zone in terms of hurting yourself or someone else, especially someone else. When people are agitated, especially kids, and they're unregulated and they slam doors or they throw their shoe or they might even try to come swinging at you, right? In adulthood, agitation is what gets people arrested. So we definitely want to curb that before it gets out of hand. But sometimes they can't go right from agitated down to calm and peaceful, right? Just do your deep breathing and everything will be fine. They can't get there when they're so upset. So sometimes we need to shift a little bit. So when a person's angry, oh, I'm so mad at them. In counseling, we try to shift anger to disappointment. I'm so mad that dad won't let me go to my friend's house. It's so unfair. Okay. So you're telling me that you're angry with dad. And it also sounds like you're a bit disappointed. You're disappointed because you really wanted to go to your friend's house, and that was a real letdown. Yeah, yeah, I am disappointed. Okay, so you can see how we shifted from angry down to more of that lethargic zone. And lethargic zone, it isn't like a place that you want to live necessarily, but it's not going to get you in trouble. Okay. For anxious, like, oh my gosh, I'm so worried. We're going to go to that party and I'm not going to know anybody and I'm going to look like an idiot. There's sometimes a thin line between anxious and excited. So we try to reframe anxious to excited. Like, you're going to that party and you're not going to know anybody. How exciting. What an adventure. I wonder what cool what cool thing could happen, right? So trying to reframe from being, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible to, oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome, right? And then from there, it's easier to get down into that calm space sometimes. So it's fun to be exuberant. Sometimes you don't want to live there because that can become really wild, unfettered, undisciplined energy that can create a lot of havoc. But it's fun to be exuberant sometimes. There's no escaping lethargy. Sometimes we just feel bored and tired. And I know virtual school, lack of social interaction, sitting on a computer, looking at their screen all day, has bumped a lot of kids down into lethargy. We don't really want to live there either, but as human beings, it's inevitable sometimes. Agitated will get us in trouble. So we want to stay away from this extreme agitated energy as much as possible. Calm is the zone that we want to be in most of the time. That's where our fight or flight and our rest digest is balanced, where we have all of our needs met and we can live our best life. So the more families practice regulation strategies and create calm space, the easier it is for every person in the household to stay calm. So I don't know if you found that to be true, but I know when I'm upset and agitated, I kind of get things stirred up with my kids and my husband. And likewise, when they're upset and agitated, it grates on me and now I'm mad too, right? So you can just create some change in yourself or just take a little ground with your kids, right? The more that you do this, the more that you practice this calm space, the calm time, it's just going to grow and grow and grow. It's really going to help your whole family. So next, we're going to talk about how to shape thinking. So of course, we've said a million times, you can't reason with the person who's in fight or flight. They're unreasonable at that point, so don't even try. But a kid or anyone needs to have a moderate handle on their emotions before they can reasonably talk. So it's not like they have to be at absolute zero in terms of agitation. They have to be completely calm, but at least moderately calm where they can kind of process through some of this stuff. And then use what's called the Cbt Triangle, cognitive behavioral therapy. You don't have to remember that term, just remember the triangle. And you can write this on a piece of paper, or you can go to therapistaid.com and get some handouts on this. But it's really a simple idea that any situation will lead you to have certain thoughts about that situation. Those thoughts will lead to feelings, and that feelings will lead to behavior. So if we can change the way that we think about something, we can change the way that we feel and behave. So here's an example. Maybe the thought is, Mom is mean. I hate her. I don't want to stop playing video games, which would lead to feelings of anger, frustration, disappointment, and maybe agitation, probably. And then the behavior, screaming and throwing things. But if you could help the child to have a new thought, like, wow, instead of, I hate Mom, I have to stop playing, think of it in terms of, wow, I got to play for a long time today. That's cool. And so if the child can think of it that way, their feeling is grateful and accepting, and their behavior is they're going to be shut off the game and wash their hands for supper. Now, I know this can be a little bit tricky sometimes to come up with alternative thoughts that are somewhat realistic. And it's not like in scenarios you can always completely eliminate the negative feelings or behavior. Like maybe instead of Mom is mean, I hate her, you can change the thought to, oh, that sucks, I don't want to. But at least you're not in agitation, you're more in that lethargic, and you can still muster up the motivation to, shut off the game and wash hands for supper without a tantrum. So this is, again, a really great strategy. It takes a little practice to get used to how this works. There's great free handouts on therapistaid.com, or again, call EAP. We can certainly coach you on some of this stuff and provide more resources. The next strategy is how bad is it or how big is my problem? And this one I've used so much with my 5-year-old because she is very sensitive and overreacts to virtually everything. She gets a little nick on her finger and, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world, right? We gotta run to the emergency room. Not really. So teaching her that what kind of a problem it is and applying scenarios to help her think critically about how big the problem is. And your kids might have different ideas about how big something is compared to you. So when I get a nick on my finger, I would think that's a tiny problem and I can just let it go. But my 5-year-old is going to say that's a medium problem, maybe even a big problem. I might need somebody to help talk me down when I'm upset from that, right? So this is a handout, again, you can get from EAP. If your sister touches your cup with dirty fingers, okay, would that be a tiny problem? You're just going to let it go? For some kids, yeah. Is it going to be a small problem? I'm going to speak up and tell my sister to stop touching my cup. Is it a medium problem? It's tough, but I can handle it without help. Yeah, I'm mad at my sister now, but I can take some deep breaths and I can regulate my emotions. A big problem. I need help to solve this right away. My sister is so unreasonable. She won't stop touching my cup. I'm going to ask mom to help me to talk to her about this so it doesn't happen again. Or a large problem. This is an emergency. Help is needed right away. Now, I don't think in any scenario, sister touching a cup would be an emergency. Emergency are for things more like crisis, blood, broken bones. Somebody needs some urgent attention right away. Maybe even violence. Definitely violence. So helping kids to recognize how big the problem is and then what's an appropriate reaction. So, for example, if my daughter was working on a art project and her sister took it and moved it and now she can't find it, she's upset. So she's like, throwing herself on the ground, kicking her feet, like, I can't find it. Where's my art project? To say, wait a minute, is this an emergency? Because you're acting like it's an emergency. I don't think so. I think it's maybe tough, but you can handle it, right? So and again, it's not like you can have these conversations right in the throes of the conflict, but processing after to help them to start thinking more critically about their behavior and what they're doing and how much they actually have control over. They think that I can't help it. And maybe when they don't have any skills, they can't. But once they start learning these skills, yes, then you can help it because you know what to do. Now, one thing about this is that you have to role model these skills consistently. You have to practice them and reinforce them a lot. And it might even be like months of doing this, maybe years of doing this, and your child just isn't getting it. They refuse to do the deep breathing. They refuse to participate, and they know what to do, but they just won't, right? That's the hard parts about parenting. But I just want to encourage you, keep practicing, keep trying, because one day, I promise you, that light bulb's going to go on and they're going to go, oh, I'm really mad. And I know that I should not punch anybody. I should go to my room and take some deep breaths. Like one day it's just going to click and they're going to get it. But it takes a lot of effort and investment to get some kids there. And again, some kids are easy and some kids, not so much. All right. So going back to those basics, looking at the physiological needs at the very foundation, maybe taking an inventory of, what are some things that you're doing awesome already in terms of meeting needs, and maybe some things that you can work on, like helping your child get better sleep or eat healthier foods, things like that. Safety needs. Is your environment, your school, your community free from violence, bullying, etc.? Do they have stable housing? Do they feel safe and secure when they go to bed at night, knowing who they're with and what they're doing? Love and belonging. Do they have strong bond with caregivers, healthy friendships and social connections, and then those boundaries and expectations about how we behave, how we express our emotions, how we handle ourselves, up to that self-esteem. I can, I will, I want to, and then the self-actualization or living the best life. So somebody had a question about the impact of virtual school. And it's impossible for me to talk about every possible impact that virtual school might be having on every kid. But if you just look at how virtual school impacts this hierarchy, you can kind of fill in those blanks and figure out how it's impacting. So for example, physiological, kids need exercise. It is so unrealistic to think that kids can sit at a computer and stare at a screen all day. And even if they can mentally do it, it's not good for their body. I mean, we even know that as adults who work at desks, right? We're not supposed to sit there all day. So that exercise might be something that is lacking in virtual school. Or maybe not. Maybe you make sure your kids get up and do their exercise every day. How about safety needs? For some kids, school was a safe place, and now they're spending more time at home where there's a lot more violence, and those safety concerns are escalating with them being home more. On the other hand, maybe some kids were being bullied at school, and home is their safe place, right? So safety needs might shift depending on your child's circumstances. Love and belonging. We know that kids need healthy, strong connections, healthy, strong role models, healthy, strong people that are going to speak positivity into their life, going to inspire and encourage them to do something great. Even if they're not going to, no kid is going to be the best at everything. That's not what I'm talking about. But saying you're not the best at everything, but you're really great at this. And I think you should continue to develop that, right? And so thinking about social connections at school, they're not having the same kind of connections with their teachers that they probably would have in person. Social relationships have changed dramatically. A lot of kids are talking about this loneliness, which is leading to that lethargy. They're just unmotivated because why should I even care? I don't get to talk to anybody. I don't get to do anything, right? On the other hand, I know that some people have increased their virtual connections with people in healthy ways or have found other outlets and social connections. So, just again, thinking about your scenario, how has love and belonging, boundaries and expectations and connections, how has that impacted your child, virtual school versus, regular school or in person? And then esteem. Sometimes if kids aren't getting enough exercise, they're spending too much time on screens, they're not sleeping well, they're lonely, self-esteem really suffers. On the other hand, some of the kids can say like, wow, I made it through the shutdown and I learned some new things, I got some new friends, right? So that can increase their self-esteem depending on their perspective and how much it's impacted them in what ways and all of that. So self-esteem, though, again, is one of those last things that we focus on after all these other things are pretty solidly in place. Nobody lives a perfect life, but you know what I mean. And then finally, that self-actualization. Is your kid able to live to their best self and their best potential in the virtual school environment? And now I'm certainly not trying to create any stigma or shame or blame. The situations that we're in often are largely outside of our control. We can control a lot of things, but there are some things we can't. And in those instances where our situation is not ideal, we just make the best of it. And so hopefully this model will kind of show you where some of the gaps might be for your child, why they might be struggling with self-esteem, why they might be struggling with lethargy or low motivation in school. And not that you can magically, fix everything with your magic wand, but maybe shore up some resources in those areas to kind of fill the gap and help your child to succeed and get what they need to be successful. So I hope this was helpful to you today. I hope you learned something new or got some new ideas on how to apply it. Just to recap, we talked about evidence-based strategies to help your child or teen reduce those intense negative emotions such as anger, anxiety. We talked about the fight or flight system or the stress response. We talked about how to identify emotions by using that feelings grid, high energy, low energy, negative feelings, positive feelings, also expanding your feelings vocabulary, talking about them frequently with your child on a regular basis, matching the body language, like, wow, your face looks really bright and excited. You seem very joyful right now, right? So the body language matched with the emotions, and then how to regulate that through de-escalating the fight or flight system, deep breathing, relaxing shoulders, calm space, calm down kits, all that stuff. Discuss how to help your child shape their thoughts using that Cbt triangle, right? So can we think differently about this rather than mom is stupid and I hate her for making me shut off the video games? Can it be, I'm glad that mom let me play today at all, right? And how that changes the outcome. And then talking about that hierarchy of basic needs, how these are crucial for your child's healthy functioning. And for all of us, none of us live a perfect life, but just taking a look at that hierarchy and seeing where are some of the spots where we might need to shore up some resources so my child can live their best life. So that is it. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Please contact Ascension EAP. Any of my teammates are happy to help and talk more about this. You can call 800-540-3758 or send us an email at eap@ascension.org. And of course, you can always visit our website at ascensionwisconsineap.org. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.